We will move now to the third presentation of this first session, which will be given by Anne Socquet. And the title is Documenting the Long-Term Preparation Phase of a Megathrust Earthquake, case of the 2014 North Chile magnitude 8.1 event.
So good morning. So I'm going to try to show you how we did to document the long-term preparation phase of a megathrust earthquake. And I'm going to, first of all, I want to acknowledge my co-authors and in particular emphasize the fact that this work has been conducted in the frame of two PhD theses funded by the Chilean CONICET, the PhD thesis of Jorge Jara and the PhD thesis of Jesus Piña Valdez. So two competing models have been proposed to explain the nucleation of earthquakes. So the first one is a slow cascade of earthquakes that trigger each other and that eventually trigger the main shock itself. And the other alternative model is a slow slip that accelerates on the fault zone that triggers foreshocks and eventually triggers the main shock itself. So far there are not so many observations of preparation phase of earthquakes, in particular using geodetic data, which are the ones that directly see the slow aseismic part of this preparation phase. Also, there were recently some observations that most large interplate earthquakes have a long precursory phase. And so this is a paper by Michel Bouchon and collaborators in 2013, and they showed that there is an accelerated release of seismicity before a large earthquake. And this is true at the short time scale, 1 day or even shorter, but this is also true at a longer time scale, like typically several months. So I will take the example of the Iquique earthquake that occurred in North Chile 2014, so I stay in South America. So this is an interesting earthquake because it has been preceded by a large and an important foreshock crisis. So there were two initial papers that looked at this crisis. And so there was a paper by the German group conducted by Bernd Schur. So they could see, so here you see the time before the earthquake, and here you see the B-value, the cumulative number of earthquakes and the magnitude. So we can see that before the earthquake, there are some swarms that precede the earthquake, and eventually there is a very strong increase of seismicity that you can also see on this black curve. So you see an overall increase of the whole seismicity, but also only the background seismicity, which is the seismicity which is not affected by triggering between earthquakes. They could also see a strong signal in the GPS time series before the earthquake, but this signal was really strong and very much studied in the 15 days before the earthquake. So I'm not going to show all the results of those first studies, but their conclusion is that this signal during the 2 weeks before the earthquake was a cascade of earthquake. And there was another study by a Franco-Chilean group, so it was conducted by Sergio Ruiz, and they looked notably at the GPS, and they looked in further details, and they could see that during those weeks that preceded the earthquake, there was a very strong GPS signal that was observable in the nearby GPS stations, and the displacement associated with those GPS stations could be inverted, and they could retrieve the slow slip on the interface, and concluded that a significant portion of this deformation was aseismic. So two different conclusions on similar data. So if we summarize, so this earthquake was preceded by intense foreshock activity. So there was a first series of swarm that started in July 2013. And 2 weeks after the main shock, there was a large foreshock of magnitude 6.7. And this large foreshock was followed by an important increase of seismic activity, and eventually the main shock occurred. And most of the studies are confined on the 15 days preceding the main shocks, but so far very little is known about a potential long-term precursor. So this is what we propose to look at using a combination of geodesy and seismology at different time scale, like the monthly, yearly time scale, but also a larger time scale, decadal time scale. So here is a GPS time series of a GPS station which is located here in the area of Iquique, so very close to the main shock. Here you see the Chilean coast. The inverted triangles are the GPS stations along the coast. Here you have the main shock and the foreshock activity color-coded by time. So you have the interseismic period, long-term preseismic period, and 2 weeks preseismic period. So the GPS time series, so notably in its east component, shows the interseismic loading, the co-seismic offset, and the post-seismic relaxation. So if we want to look at what happens before the earthquake, we removed everything that was after it. And so here is the detrended GPS time series, and we can see that during the 2 weeks before the earthquake, there is a very strong movement with respect to what occurs before. Okay, so this is what has been seen already. And also what we can see in this time series is that the trend before July 2013 is slightly different from the trend after July 2013. So it's not very, very strong, but it's significant. And so we try to do the same analysis on all the coastal GPS stations. And here is what we got. So here you can see all the coastal GPS time series. And the color code represents the 6 months velocity. So we can see that the velocity oscillates around 0 because the GPS time series have been detrended. And what we see is that, notably in the area of Iquique, there are 3 GPS stations located in Iquique, and those 3 GPS stations show a very, very consistent change of velocity, which is small but consistent. And we can see that this velocity change also extends laterally and spans an area of about 200 kilometers. Interestingly, when we are away from the source, we have no significant velocity change. So this is a strong assumption that we have so this very consistent velocity anomaly. So we can compute the displacement associated with this anomaly, and the displacement is shown here by the blue arrows. I'm sorry, it's not very clear. And this displacement can be inverted in order to retrieve the slip on the subduction interface. So these are the blue contours that you can see here. So the slip distribution is not extremely well constrained, of course, because the data is quite noisy, and also we don't have a very, very dense network. But still, the magnitude is quite well constrained, and so we have a magnitude of about 6.5. And if we compare with the cumulative energy released by foreshocks during the same period, we can say that 80% of this movement is aseismic. So this is a strong argument to say that the nucleation of this earthquake started with a slow slip increase on the subduction interface. So we did the same exercise for the 2-week periods that has been already studied before. So we find consistent results with what had been published before. We have a slow slip of about magnitude 7, and if we compare with the energy released seismically, we can say that about 35% is aseismic. So now we wanted also to look at the source properties of foreshocks during the same period. So we made a spectral ratio of interface seismicity. So we selected earthquakes using their focal mechanisms, and we made a selection of interface earthquakes, and we compared the spectrum of those earthquakes. So we looked at pairs of earthquakes that are close in space and that are close in magnitude also. And we see that pairs of earthquakes that are within the interseismic period show a spectral ratio of about 1, which means that the frequency content of those earthquakes are similar within the interseismic period. And interestingly, if we compare foreshocks to earthquakes that occur during the interseismic period, we see that the foreshocks seem to be depleted in high frequency. And this is the same for aftershocks with respect to earthquakes that occur during the interseismic period. We see that aftershocks seem also to be depleted in high frequency. So this is only valid for, this has been done for earthquake of about magnitude 5, and since it is strongly depends on earthquake magnitude, distance to the station, path effect, site effect, etc. This is valid only for a small subset of our data set. So we try to extend this analysis to a wider, on a more general way. And to do that, we tried something which is the following, and we tried to look at the residual of our data with respect to ground motion prediction equations that are supposed to give the acceleration as a function of the distance for a different kind of earthquake and any kind of magnitude. So this is a way to try to compare the frequency content of larger and smaller magnitude earthquake. So the idea is that for each record, we can compute the response spectrum, and this response spectrum we can extract the acceleration predicted, the acceleration recorded at different frequencies, and this acceleration we can plot the acceleration as a function of the distance, and then have the median for each earthquake, and the difference between the record for each earthquake and the model will give us the residual. And what we see is that at lower frequencies, like 0.75 hertz, we see that the residuals are all positive, so there is no significant change in the energy released by earthquakes at this frequency. But if we go at a higher frequency, notably 5 or 10 hertz, it seems that there is a change in the residuals that we obtain between the interseismic period and the pre-seismic period and the post-seismic. And initially we were really surprised to see that, because we did this work actually because we thought that maybe the earthquake itself would generate a change in the source characteristics of earthquakes. And we expected to have a difference between aftershocks and what we had before the earthquake. And actually what we see is not that. We see that we have a change, but this change seems to initiate during the nucleation phase of the earthquake, and when we start to have the slow slip that is start to accelerate significantly on the fault. If we imagine that the subduction, if we regard the subduction interface as an interfingering of stable and unstable patches, we have a slow slip, a slow creep during the interseismic phase at depths and also in low coupled areas. So the frictional asperities break as a response to this slow slip, and this is what generates the background seismicity. Then 8 months before the earthquake, we have an increase of this slow aseismic slip and an increase of background seismicity. And it seems also that we have a slight change in the source properties of foreshock that are characterized by a lower stress drop. Then there is this largest aftershock, magnitude 6.7, after which a cascade of earthquake, it triggers a cascade of earthquake that follows it, and this cascade of earthquake is superimposed on the pre-existing slow slip. And finally, we have the main shock that ruptures the whole area. So now we could wonder what is the mechanism that drives this slow slip acceleration. And so this is a paper, again, by Michel Bouchon and collaborators, and they could see that there is a synchronized seismicity between deep earthquake and shallow earthquake that occurred before Tohoku, but also before Ikike earthquake. And they propose that this can be explained by slab plunge and slab deformation before the Megathrust earthquake. So this has been studied for the 3 months before the Megathrust, and we were wondering if we can extend this study and see if there are interactions between deep and shallow seismicity. So North Chile is a very good area for that. So here you have the shallow seismicity, the deep seismicity. It's an area where there is a lot of deep seismicity. It's also an area where there were several Megathrust earthquakes, and there was also a slab pool earthquake in 2005, magnitude 7.8. And interestingly, this slab pool earthquake was just below the 2014 Ikike earthquake. So, so we were wondering whether there is any interaction between the slab pool and the interface earthquake. So here is what we did. So this is a GPS time series again, but instead of 4 years, it's 15 years GPS time series. So it's again a GPS that is installed in the area of Ikike, close to the rupture. So you can see the Ikike earthquake, post-seismic tail, and you can see also here the offset associated with the slab pool earthquake that ruptured the slab. And if we can see also the interseismic loading. And this interseismic loading seems to change slightly after Tarapacá earthquake. So like that, it's difficult to see. So we detrended, and it appears that this change in velocity is very neat. And we have 4 millimeters of difference before and after Tarapacá earthquake. So we did that on the GPS stations that were available at the time. It's not so many. And we could see that there is a change in velocity in the whole area. And when we are far away, so here, for example, in Arica or close to Antofagasta, there is no change. So this change could be generated by a post-seismic, of course, associated with that followed Tarapacá slab pool earthquake. So the idea is not to examine why we have really this change, but in any case, whatever the mechanism, the fact that we have a change in the east component, it means that there is here a change in the coupling. And so we looked also at the seismicity. So this is the cumulative seismicity that is in the Megathrust in this area. And we can see that we have an increase of the cumulative seismicity. And this increase seems to start after the Tarapacá slab pool earthquake. So there is, so from those data, it seems that there is an interaction between this strong slab pool earthquake, major slab pool earthquake, and what happens before on the Megathrust in terms of coupling. And it seems that this slab pool earthquake generated a decoupling of the subduction interface, because an accelerated seismicity at the interface and a diminished eastward velocity are compatible with a decoupling. So another thing that we wanted to investigate is to see whether we could reproduce the results by Michel Bouchon and extend them over time, and see if there are those interactions between earthquakes of smaller magnitude. So this is typically earthquakes of magnitude 4. And we looked at couples of deep then shallow earthquake within 2-day time window. And we could see that there are synchronized coupled of earthquakes that start at depth and then on the shallow part. And it seems that after the 2005 slab pool earthquake, we found 16 couples like this within a 2-day time window, so very, very close in time. And before that earthquake, we didn't find any synchronized events. So this seems to be also a marker of interactions between the deep part of the slab and the shallow part of the slab. And the mechanism of interaction cannot be a simple stress triggering because the earthquakes are too small. And so we looked at those interactions over a larger time period. So this is a little bit complicated graph, but it's the last one. So you have here, you have the time, here the time. This is the deep seismicity. This is the shallow seismicity. And here the bars correspond to the seismicity rate over different time spans. So typically here you have the yearly seismicity rate, and on the top of the graph you have the daily seismicity rate. So what is interesting is that we see that the background seismicity, this is the background seismicity, occurs by a series of pulses. So this is very clear from this graph, and we can also see that we have bursts of seismicity that seem to be synchronized over time. And we can see that the 2014, so the vertical bars, so here is the Tarapacá slab pool earthquake, this is the Iquique earthquake, the 2014 earthquake, and the dashed lines correspond to the other thrust earthquake that occurred in North Chile and around. So here is Iquique, here is Tarapacá, so the two main ones. And away from that, we have Antofagasta, which is about 600 kilometers away. This is Arequipa earthquake in 2001. So they are quite far away. So we can see that Iquique earthquake is characterized by enhanced deep seismicity and shallow seismicity before it. And after Iquique earthquake, it's impressive how there is no background seismicity. It means that all the seismicity that occurs after Iquique can be explained by aftersleep or aftershocks, a regular aftershock cascade. And interestingly, we see that at depth, there is no background seismicity after the Megathrust. So we could imagine that we have some pooling here at the bottom of the slab, and when the Megathrust occurs, there is a sort of clamping here that clamps increases the normal stress on the fault that cut the slab, and that makes that the seismicity stops, more or less. And so interestingly, so this is very nice for this close-by interaction, but interestingly, we see the same type of phenomenon for Antofagasta earthquake, which was located at the southern end of the gap, so here, quite far away. And we see that, so this is the seismicity only in this area, in the area close to Iquique. And we can see that at depths, after Antofagasta earthquake, we have a silent period of deep seismicity. So those interactions between shallow and deep slab seismicity seem to be valid not only locally, but also at a very large distance. So in summary, 9 years before the 2014 Iquique earthquake, we had the 2005 slab pool earthquake that triggers a decrease of eastward GPS velocity associated with an increase of deep and shallow seismicity rate. So this can be interpreted as a decoupling of the interface, and this decoupling of the interface might occur in response to slab tearing. 8 months before the 2014 Iquique earthquake, we have a decrease of coastal velocities, increase of seismicity, so a decrease of B value, and decrease of high-frequency radiations. So this can be interpreted as a magnitude 6.5 slow slip event that is 80% aseismic in nature, and that is associated with a change in the source of earthquake that gets smoother and smoother. And finally, 15 days before Iquique earthquake, we have a large foreshock that triggers a lot of following seismic activity. And so this is associated with a strong deformation signal that can be modeled as a magnitude 7 event derived from geodesy. And this event seems to be a little bit aseismic, but only 35% aseismic, when the long-term slow slip was much more aseismic. So thank you for your attention.